Um, so welcome everyone. You are here for a Snack and Learn webinar on asset management, part of a series on asset management being done around the world. Today we're going to talk to you specifically about organisational maturity assessments and improvement programs, and how we've done those for a couple of clients in the US, rail clients specifically. And those two we're going to talk about are Amtrak and Metra. So we'll give you a bit more information about them shortly. So your presenters today are myself, Tom Goodyer. I'm an Assistant Vice President here in WSP USA. My accent is rather misleading. I am indeed British, and I worked for WSP in the UK for many years before transferring over to Chicago about 2 years ago. I'm a principal consultant here in the Chicago office. And my experience is mostly across transportation, energy, aviation sectors, and I've mostly been doing asset management work for the last few years. Also a lot of capital planning work, business process improvement, and performance management as well. I'm an engineer by background and worked on projects in the US, UK, Netherlands, Middle East, and other than maybe our more typical projects, I also spent 2 years working on infrastructure policy for the UK government, which is how I got into asset management in the first place. Neela?
Hello, my name is Neela Babu, and I am a consultant in the asset management group here in advisory services at WSP USA. My role on this team has primarily been to work with transit agencies in the northeast of the U.S., though our group is expanding into other sectors, including water, power, ports, airports, and others. We are also expanding our services internationally, and I'm looking forward to working on some of those projects as well. My degrees are in civil engineering, and I also have experience working on policy in the California State Legislature. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Neela. So our agenda for our short session this morning is we're going to talk to you a bit about the process we use for our gap assessments. Then we're going to talk about the proprietary tool we use for doing those. We're going to talk about how that process worked with one of our clients, Amtrak, which Neela will cover. And we'll also talk about how it went for Metra. And then I'll just wrap up with some comments on the benefits of our approach and also some closing thoughts. So firstly, why do we do these assessments? Our clients often want to do them, and it's the result of a particular outcome or a set of outcomes. You know, sometimes it might be something like they have some assets that are performing poorly and they want to get to the bottom of it. Not just an investigation into that specific asset, but a wider look at how does the organisation work and how can we address some of those issues. Often, some senior managers might not have the information to hand that they feel they need to make business decisions. And again, that's one of the things that we often end up discussing through these. Similarly, the technology tools they have are not providing the results that were intended. We see this a lot with some of our clients at the moment. Some of their business processes or practices are just ineffective. You know, they want to figure out how they can improve them, or just the general capability of the organisation is deemed to be poor. So these capability assessments, they provide a diagnostic of the organisation. It's a snapshot, a look at in depth at how an organisation that owns and operates assets, how they are working. We take a view of their current practices and we're measuring it against some established criteria to determine the path forwards. Another reason we do it is to help understand the starting position. So if there is a lot of change going on in an organisation, sometimes these change programs start without really understanding where you should have been starting from, and so taking this in-depth look at an organisation is a great basis for an ongoing change program that might come out of it. So those are just some of the reasons why some of our clients are interested in doing these and why we would pursue them. So ultimately, we're trying to get to an improvement program. Some kind of change is going to be happening in the organization, and our process is 5 steps. Typically, most of the contracts we work on are exactly like this. So we mobilize, of course. The second stage is we're doing a baseline assessment. Then we go to this gap analysis. We then try and figure out a vision, what the target might be for where they want to get to. We put that together with the gap analysis to determine an improvement program. The baseline assessment is in some ways the most crucial part of it. We undertake a series of interviews and workshops with stakeholders in the client organization, from executive management all the way down to the front line usually. We capture all of that in what we call an as-is report. It's just a simple objective look at what their current business processes are and how they work. The third stage, the gap analysis, is we review how well those processes work, compared to the ideals, and then we capture all that in our gap assessment report. Stage 4, we facilitate a session or a number of sessions with executives to help them discern what their vision for change might be, and then we can put that all into an asset management strategy. And then finally, we're producing the improvement program. It's the result, the culmination of all those previous steps. So we'll collaborate with the client to help schedule, particular discrete initiatives about how they can improve asset management in their organization. And we'll put all that together in a roadmap. Now, we have been contracted to run the entirety of that process for both Amtrak and Metra, these 2 US rail clients we're talking about today. But in this session today, we are solely talking about the gap analysis, again, where we review how well they work compared to some ideals. So, Neela.
Thank you, Tom. So our group has a proprietary tool that we use to conduct our gap assessments, which we call AM2C, which stands for Asset Management Capability Assessment Model. We use this tool to assess the asset management maturity of an agency. The tool is organized by 8 pathways, which comprehensively capture asset management practices. Those pathways are alignment to organizational goals, control of assets, asset management planning, capital planning and delivery, maintenance planning and delivery, operations and fault management, informed decisions, and resource capabilities. The tool has 267 questions that fall into 31 subjects within these 8 pathways. The AM2C tool is mapped to the ISO 55001 standard and to global best practices, which provide standards to which we can compare an agency's asset management maturity. Our tool uses a maturity scale, which is aligned to those global best practices that I mentioned, and is shown on the bottom of the slide. When we use this evaluation tool with clients, we discuss with them the target state, which helps us in our evaluation and helps us as we develop their improvement roadmap, so we can see from the gap assessment where they are and compare it to where they want to go and develop the roadmap accordingly. Next slide, please, Tom. I now want to talk specifically about one project in particular with our client, Amtrak. Amtrak is the national passenger railroad in the U.S. that provides intercity service. In addition to rolling stock, Amtrak is also responsible for infrastructure assets such as bridges, track, communications and signals, and electric traction assets, which are all maintained by the engineering group. While Chicago is the hub based on the map as shown, a lot of Amtrak's ridership falls in the Northeast corridor along the U.S. Many trains run very long distances slowly over very old infrastructure, which Amtrak partly owns. Our project focused on these infrastructure assets along the Northeast corridor of the U.S. The project sought to assess the current asset management program at Amtrak Engineering, perform a baseline assessment of existing processes, conduct a gap analysis to assess their practices compared to industry best practices, and provide a roadmap of recommendations for closing the gap between their existing practices and industry best practices. Next slide, please, Tom. Our approach with Amtrak, as Tom mentioned previously, involved a lot of stakeholder interviews. We conducted several in-person meetings across the Northeast Corridor with the different disciplines being structures, electric traction, communications and signals, and track. We talked to higher-ups and management and down to maintenance staff to get a comprehensive picture of how asset management is viewed and carried out at Amtrak Engineering. We took what we heard in the interviews and used it to complete our AM2C tool with those 267 questions. For this particular client, we actually evaluated each of those 4 disciplines individually, and then we also evaluated Amtrak Engineering as a whole. So what you can see on this slide here is the results from Amtrak Engineering as a whole. We also then met with the chief engineer at Amtrak to identify his objectives for asset management within the organization and to establish a vision for their asset management program. We used the results of the gap assessment, the asset management vision, and the chief engineer's objectives to develop an improvement roadmap. Next slide, please, Tom. The slide that's up now shows that improvement roadmap that we developed. What you'll notice is along the left-hand side, it's broken out into different categories. So the topmost is executive leadership and enablement, and below that are the 8 pathways that are part of our asset management maturity model. So while developing the improvement roadmap was part of our original scope, actually implementing the project briefs was not. However, our success of the project has since led to additional asset management work for Amtrak Engineering. The original contract was extended, and we have since signed a new contract to continue serving as an asset management advisor to Amtrak Engineering. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Neela. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about Metra. So this is a project for which I've been the project manager. So Metra is a commuter railroad for the Chicago region. As you can see from the map, Chicago's not labeled there, but the center of that network is Chicago there. So it has 11 lines that radiate out from Chicago into the outermost suburbs, and the railroad itself is characterized by, it's got relatively old bi-level rolling stock, mostly diesel locomotive hauled, although one of the lines is electrified. Very much like Amtrak, it's running on very old infrastructure. Partly it's owned by Metra, partly it's owned by some of the freight railroads, and they have limited control over some of that, over some of those assets, just as with Amtrak. Our scope was to assess the whole of the organisation, unlike with Amtrak, and our scope includes reviewing how asset management works at Metra, helping produce an improvement programme for them, developing an asset management plan for them, delivering some training on asset management, and also creating some tools to help them with their asset data and forecasting for costs. So our approach for Metra was slightly different. Before we got going on the gap analysis, we actually started with a change readiness survey. So we surveyed a relatively large sample of the organisation to try and discern how ready they were for change, how bought into a change program like this they were going to be. And we got great results. People were very interested in asset management, whether or not they knew what it was. They liked the idea of improvements happening in these areas. And then we went through our typical process as well. So we used the inputs from all those stakeholder interviews and workshops to complete the gap assessment tool, our proprietary one, AM2C, for the whole of Metra. And you can see the results there. You might note that those results are very, very similar to the Amtrak ones. And I would also say that for many of the clients we look at here in the US, you get a similar spread of results. Afterwards, as it turned out, they were very sensitive about some of the recommendations we made for change. The change readiness survey had indicated that most of the staff are very happy with this, but some of the executive team really had a very limited appetite for embarking on anything they didn't absolutely have to do. You know, Metra is facing a bit of a cash crisis in the coming year or so on their operational funding side, and so the idea of committing to anything is hard for them at the moment. And so at the moment we haven't yet done the improvement program, or we're developing it right now, but their vision for where they want to go is very limited, you know, and so our improvement program is correspondingly small at the moment. Later in the year, we think things will change a bit, so we will have a second bite at the apple. So outcomes. These have been wonderful processes for us to run through with these clients. You know, I think we can quite confidently say we're a trusted advisor to both Amtrak and Metra for any of their needs to do with asset management. As Neela was saying with Amtrak, you know, we've been awarded significant additional tasks, which in aggregate are larger than the original contracts for those two clients. And one really good outcome with Amtrak has been that we're now contracted to do annual gap assessments for them. So we'll be going back every year to track their improvement using our tool. Also, the recommendations that we've made as a result of this process, they're specific to each of the 8 pathways that Neela talked us through earlier, and they've led to us describing or creating for the clients specific change initiatives, which we, you know, our team are supporting, but also other parts of WSP are supporting. So it's generating work, follow-on work for both us and other parts of the company. So just some final closing thoughts. We believe that using a standardized process like this is very advantageous for strategic organizational assessment projects like these, because the more you repeat this process, the more you have a track record of similar work, and that track record really helps us sell it. We're finding that lots of our clients really like to be benchmarked against their peers, and again, this is self-fulfilling. You know, the more we do it, the more benchmarks we get, and the more the clients that we're selling to appreciate that big list of benchmarks we hold. You know, it has increased and increasing value to the company because we're able to leverage that. Also, running through a process like this, it helps that any negative findings we come up with, you know, anything that they're not doing, you know, or anything that they're doing that is really not very optimal, and because we go through this process, they perceive them as less personal than someone just coming in and making a bunch of recommendations. And you know, because we have this very clear staged process, you know, it helps bring the clients along through multiple stages, and it means that we're securing the buy-in at each of those stage gates. And just final comment really is, you know, we're available to support any region in the world. You know, we have a number of staff here who've worked all around the world, and we're happy to continue doing so. And I would just close on that point that running through this process inevitably comes up with a number of recommendations, and those recommendations can lead to ongoing work, you know, for you guys wherever you may be, you know, as well as us. So with that, we've had a very quick run through there. You know, the format is 15 minutes, and I've run over by a couple. So, Karina, do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Tom and Neela, for this excellent presentation. If you don't mind displaying your the final slide with your contact details. Also, we don't have a question yet, but in the meantime, I would like to let everybody know they can download a copy of your presentation from the handout box. You should see that box in your control panel, the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's see if we have a question coming in. For now, I know also we have a first question. What exactly were these organizations doing to manage their assets?
I'll speak for Metra, and then Neela can answer for Amtrak. With Metra, as an organization, it's only existed for about 30 years. There used to be each of those lines used to be separate private railroads that were run, you know, from Victorian times. And so Metra's been around for about 35 years, and they really haven't changed many of their practices. Up until, well, even now, they are still running most of their back office systems off of a mainframe system. That lots of their asset management activity is based off of paper work orders. Supervisors writing little tickets to their staff to go and fix something or go and inspect it, and also almost all of their maintenance activity is reactive. Very, very little scheduled preventative, and almost no preventative that's based on performance. Neela, do you want to summarize Amtrak?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So if you recall from our slide that presented the Amtrak results, they were basically, their average was in the establishing area. So they had asset management practices. They were using Maximo as an asset management software. But a lot of it was related, a lot of their use was related to federal compliance, so that they could show that they had been conducting the maintenance that they were federally required to conduct. So some of the asset classes that did not have such federal requirements ended up receiving less funding and less attention in general. So what we wanted to do with them was look at that across the board and say, how can you use the system more effectively? What other business process improvements can you make to more effectively manage your assets? So as Tom said with Metra, a lot of the work done by Amtrak is reactive, and that's due to a couple of factors, one of which being they have a lot of outdated assets and do not receive enough funding to replace them as frequently as they would like to. So they end up having more reactive work as a result of that, and then it becomes a safety priority. So they definitely had procedures and standard operating procedures in place for handling different types of maintenance, but realistically, a lot of what they did was reactive.
Thank you. Next question. How can I use the AM2C tool? This is one of our colleagues asking.
Get in contact with us.
Okay.
I mean, it's a tool that we've developed over here, and particularly our boss Chris Roberts and Neela has spent a lot of time on it in the last, I don't know, 2 years, Neela.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very large spreadsheet, and it's got a lot of benchmark data in there. And to use it, we would typically run through a number of workshops with the clients, and then come back, and offline we would go through and try and answer all those questions.
Okay.
We would not typically go through those questions one by one with a client. It's too much, and also you'll end up in fights about exactly what score you're giving them for which questions. So yeah, it's typically something that we do internally after we've run through all those client engagement activities.
Very good. Next question. Is the AM, so I think it covers a little bit, is the AM2C tool available for us to use internally to generate our own partial judgments of client organization maturity?
Depends on what you mean by the question, I guess. I'm not sure whether you mean, can we do it without consulting with the client? And I mean, you would really struggle to get through the tool without consulting the clients and going through a lot of in-depth conversations, because some of those questions they're very searching. They're very detailed. They're asking about very specific business processes that our clients may or may not have. But yes, the tool is available. You just get in contact with us, and we'll figure out the best way of managing that.
Very good. Next question. What are the implications of the assessments listed under each pathway on slide 11? If you want to go
so,
back.
so could you repeat the question, Karina? Sorry, what was the impact of them? Oh.
Is that the roadmap?
What are the implications of the assessments listed under each pathway? You have those pathways.
The implications. Okay, interesting.
So we really use the.
Yeah. Sorry, Neela, go for it.
So yeah, so we use the results of this, and maybe if you want to flip to the roadmap slide, Karina, Tom, actually on slide 9, we really use it to inform the improvement roadmap. And a couple of things that I neglected to mention on here. What you see on here, each bar represents a different project that we recommend that that the client undertakes in order to improve their asset management maturity. So you also see a bunch of arrows pointing to different directions. So what we do is, with Amtrak in particular, I think we came up with about 46 different project briefs. And these are smaller chunks so that they're theoretically easier to implement because they require a smaller amount of funding. But we link them, we provide a title, scope, description, justification, outcome, timing, budget, and one of the other things is we relate them to one another. So that's why you see the arrows connecting from one to another, and this on the going from left to right as a timeline. So we basically lay out for them which initiatives need to happen first before later initiatives can have success. So we really use the outcomes of the gap assessment to inform how they can, in a step-by-step manner, come up with an asset management program that will comprehensively address all of their needs.
All right, we almost reached the time limit, so we'll take a last question. The question is, I was wondering what was the reasoning for developing the 8 pathways of asset management practices opposed to using the IMS 6-block asset management subject group model?
I think neither Neela or I can answer that. That is so. I think when Chris Roberts started developing the AMCC tool, that's how he decided to break them down. You know, and the way that all those questions are broken down in the AMCC tool, it makes a lot of sense. You know, and I'm not certain, but I think this 8 pathways model, I think it predates the IAM 6. I can't remember what they call them, but those 6 areas that the IAM has, the way that they've broken it down.
All right. So I want to reassure all the other participants who sent the questions. I will send them to our presenters, and you will get a reply either from me or from them directly. I would like to thank you, Neela and Tom, for an amazing presentation, and I would like to thank all our participants for joining us today. I'm going to wrap up the webinar now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.